absolutely. We have,
Okay, final thing I want to move on to is, and I really just want to touch on this because I think this probably warrants a podcast on its own, and it's the issue of slavery. You've come to this podcast saying, I'm so proud of the Sharia. It's like the perfect ideal system. If that's the case, then why did it not abolish slavery?
I think there are two things to look at here, two very separate things, or three. The first thing I want to get out of people's mind is slavery as we know it today in Western terms, but in what we have learned in history, recent history.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's slavery based on kidnapping people, based on race, based on color. That has no place in Islam and never had any place in Islam. That is from the slavery of Jahiliyyah that was practiced before Islam, where people would be kidnapped and sold into slavery. This is something which is from the major sins in Islam and is worthy of severe punishment. Slavery in Islam is a replacement or an alternative to the system of prisoners of war. That's what it is. So you are fighting against the people, they're fighting against you. Sword to sword, gun to gun, the fighting takes place between the two armies. And when one army overcomes the other, Allah Azza wa Jal gave a right to enslave those that remain.
All of those that remain.
That is a choice now of the Muslim commander, has three choices.
Is that not what happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ with the issue of Banu Qurayza, when the companion said, kill all the men and enslave all of the women?
So let's come to Bani Qurayza. We'll come to Bani Qurayza. Okay. I want to come to Bani Qurayza. I think that's important. That's an important topic. But that is actually not a war. There was no war between the Muslims and Bani Qurayza. We're talking about now slavery as a result of war.
Okay.
This is effectively what we would call today being a prisoner of war. The first thing is the Muslim commander has three choices. The first choice is to free them, all of them, let them all go. The second choice is to ransom them. So that is to imprison them and to ransom each individual, as was done in the Battle of Badr. And the third is to enslave them. When they are enslaved, I want to understand, what I wanted to show you is that people have this idea of slavery. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he said, لولا الجهاد وبر أمي. If it wasn't for jihad and being good to my mother, I would have wished to die as a slave. The slave is clothed from the clothing that the owner has. They're fed. They're not burdened with what they can't bear. Now I want you to see treatment of prisoners of war today. Okay, I'm reluctant to give examples, but let's just take, and maybe it's not a great example, but let's just take Guantanamo as an example of prisoners, ala khilaf in between them, whether they're prisoners of war or whatever, but people who are imprisoned as a result of some sort of fighting that's going between, and the treatment that is given. Let's look at Japanese prisoners of war in the Second World War and how they were treated. Wallahi, the Islamic system of slavery is far, far more merciful, especially when you add a final element, and that is the encouragement of freeing a slave. How many sins are there in Islam that the expiation for that sin is فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ, free a slave? Islam didn't come to enslave people. Islam came to bring people out of slavery to other people and into the slavery of Allah Azza wa Jalla. That's what Islam came for. However, you have to have a system for prisoners of war. What do? We just lock them all up? We lock them all up and then mistreat them, as around the world. And I gave the example of America, not because we're talking about Muslims, but because we're talking about a country that prides itself on human rights and how, force feedings and all that type of stuff that takes place. Or you bring them into your house, they work for you, you clothe them, you feed them, you look after them, and then you free them whenever you mess up. To be honest,
there's no comparison really, is there?
It really is a system, but the problem is that this word slavery has been tainted by slavery that was based on kidnapping people, that was based on color, that was based on race. That slavery was practiced by who? Not by the Muslims. The Muslims were the ones being enslaved. How many of those people were taken from Africa and brought over to the States in the time of slavery were ulama of Islam, some of them. Scholars of Islam, people who were people of knowledge who were kidnapped for no other crime than the color of their skin, and they were kidnapped and brought to the United States. That's the slavery of the West, not